It's interesting when you think about the ransom letters in the Nancy Guthrie case. Remember, there are two that Savannah Guthrie said she thinks are legit. There were these letters early on that went to the local TV stations in Arizona. And now one of the stations is saying that there was activity back on February 10th, a small amount of money put into the Bitcoin account that was listed in the ransom letter, and a note that said, "We are ready to talk, contact us." Presumably that was from the Guthrie family or from the FBI. But there's been...
It was 1 minute before 2 in the morning when the camera at her front door went dark, not switched off, not unplugged in some careless sweep of a hand, disconnected, cleanly, quietly, as if someone outside that door knew exactly which device to silence first, and exactly how to silence it without making a sound. For the next 41 minutes, the most documented house on that quiet Catalina Foothills street recorded almost nothing. No alarm, no scream, no call for help, just a small Arizona suburb, sleeping under a winter sky, and an 84-year-old woman somewhere inside that home, alone, with a heart that needed medication, a pacemaker that needed a signal, and a daughter watching the morning news in another city who had no idea anything was wrong. By sunrise, the woman would be gone. Her phone would still be inside, her wallet, her medication, her keys, all sitting where she had left them. The only thing missing from the house would be her. And the only thing left behind on her front porch would be drops of her own blood, smeared into the concrete like she had been pulled across it. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. She is the mother of one of the most recognizable journalists in America. And what happened to her in those 41 silent minutes has become one of the strangest, most carefully watched missing persons cases in recent memory. This is the story of how a quiet woman vanished from a quiet street, how her family's grief became a national obsession, how strangers tried to profit from her disappearance, and how a single Bitcoin transaction worth $152 became the most analyzed payment in the entire investigation. Welcome back to True Crime Investigator, Alex. If you want to follow this case to the very end with us, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell. Because what we are about to walk through is not finished. It is still happening as we speak. And the more eyes that stay on this story, the better the chance that someone, somewhere, finally tells the truth. To understand how this began, we have to go back further than the morning she disappeared. We have to go back to a normal Saturday night, January 31st, 2026. Tucson, Arizona, the Catalina Foothills, a quiet, hillside community north of the city, the kind of neighborhood where streetlights end early, where neighbors recognize each other's cars, where most people are inside by 9. Nancy Guthrie had spent that Saturday evening exactly the way she liked to spend her Saturdays. She had eaten dinner at her daughter Annie's home, just a few miles away. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, the man married to Annie, had offered to take her home afterward. He was the last person from her family to see her alive. He dropped her off in front of her house at around 9:45 at night. 5 minutes later, her garage door closed for the final time. The light inside flickered once, then it shut. From the outside, the home looked like every other home on the block. Quiet, settled, safe. A vulnerable adult, 84 years old, with a pacemaker and a daily heart medication regimen, was now alone inside, expecting nothing more remarkable than a Sunday morning church service streamed online. She would never make it to that service. The next morning, around 11, friends and family began to worry. Nancy was always punctual about church. She had told a friend she would be watching the live stream from her own home. When she did not log in, when she did not answer her phone, when no message came through, the alarm went up softly at first. Maybe she had overslept. Maybe the internet had failed. Maybe she had stepped out into her garden. Relatives drove to the home around 11 that morning. They walked the property. They called her name. They opened the front door. What they found inside did not look like a robbery. It did not look like a struggle that anyone could see at a glance. Her phone was still there. Her purse was still there. Her medications still there, untouched. A glass of water still sat where she had left it the night before. Everything that mattered to her daily life remained inside that house. Everything except her. By noon, the family had called 911. The Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived, treated the scene, as an unusual missing persons report and began their initial sweep. But within hours, the tone of that investigation changed completely, because that is when investigators stepped onto her front porch and saw what no one had wanted to see. Drops of blood, small, dark against the concrete, smeared, according to a former FBI profiler who would later analyze the images, in a way that suggested someone had been dragged. The blood ran from the entryway toward the driveway, like a trail leading away from a place she had not chosen to leave. By Monday, February 2nd, the sheriff's department had declared the home a crime scene. They had begun pulling DNA samples. They had begun the slow, painful business of asking themselves not where had she gone, but who had taken her. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos stood in front of cameras and confirmed what the family already feared. He believed Nancy Guthrie had been kidnapped. She had not wandered off. She had not fallen. She had been taken from her own home, against her will, in the middle of the night, while the rest of the neighborhood slept. But before we go any further into what investigators began uncovering inside that house, you have to understand who Nancy Guthrie really is, because the woman behind the headlines is not a celebrity. She is a mother. She is a widow. She is a woman who, by every account, lived a quiet life of faith, family, and friendship, far from the spotlight that her famous daughter occupies every weekday morning on national television. Nancy Ellen Long was born on the 27th of January, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She moved with her family to the Tucson area in the early 1970s and made it her home for more than 5 decades. She married Charles Guthrie. Together, they had 3 children: Savannah, the journalist the world now knows; Annie, whose home she had visited that final Saturday night; and Cameron, her son. Her husband died in 1988, at the age of 49, during a mining exploration trip in Mexico. Nancy raised her 3 children largely on her own. She built a life around her church, her grandchildren, and the rituals of small kindnesses that defined her. By the time of her disappearance, she had just turned 84 years old, 4 days before being driven home for the last time. She required daily medication for a heart condition. She had a pacemaker. She had difficulty walking. She was, in the cold language of police reports, a vulnerable adult. That word, vulnerable, is going to matter throughout this entire story. It is the word law enforcement used. It is the word her family clung to, and it is the word that turns everything that happened next from a mystery into something genuinely terrifying. Because whoever did this knew exactly who they were taking. Now we go back inside that house. Back to those 41 silent minutes between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning on the 1st of February, the window of time investigators believe Nancy Guthrie was taken, and what was found in those minutes, technically, mechanically, electronically, would become the most precise digital timeline of an abduction ever assembled in real time. It started with a single device, a Google Nest doorbell camera mounted at the front of the home. According to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, that camera disconnected at 1:47 in the morning, not powered down by a system error, not interrupted by a storm. Disconnected. The camera stopped sending its feed. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 in the morning, a different camera at the home registered something. The system classified what it saw as a person. But there was no recorded video, because the home was not subscribed to a video storage service at that time. Whatever moved across that lens at 2:12 was seen by the system, logged by the system, and then lost. At least, lost in the moment. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28 in the morning, something happened that no one outside that house could have planned for. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker app stopped syncing with her phone. Her implanted cardiac device, the small mechanical heart inside her chest that had been quietly monitored by her medical team for years, lost its connection to the outside world. The pacemaker itself kept working. It kept pacing her heart, but the data link, the bridge between her body and her doctor, went silent. Because the phone it was syncing with, the phone that held the app, was no longer close enough to receive the signal. In other words, in those 41 minutes, an electronic story was told without a single witness. A camera was disabled. A person was detected. And then, the woman of the house was carried, walked, or dragged out of range of her own pacemaker. By 2:28, she was gone from the only place she had ever truly been at home. When investigators reconstructed this timeline in the days that followed, they realized something that hardened their entire approach to the case, because it was not random. It was patient. It was methodical. Whoever had been at her front door knew about that doorbell camera, knew where it was, knew how to handle it, and it would soon become clear that whoever had been there before. Now, before we get to the masked man at the door, the photographs that would horrify a nation, and the chain of ransom letters that pulled in television networks across America, I want to say this directly. If you are watching this on True Crime Investigator Alex, and this case has been on your mind, I want you to do me one favor. Drop a like on this video. That single tap is the difference between this case being seen by thousands and being seen by millions. And right now, every set of eyes on Nancy Guthrie is one more chance that a tip, a memory, a license plate, a face will surface. So, tap it, then come back. Because we are about to walk into the footage that turned this case from a missing persons report into a national emergency. On the 10th of February, 10 days after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, FBI Director Kash Patel posted something to social media that no one expected. A short video. Black and white. Stilted, like all doorbell footage tends to be. It showed a man at Nancy Guthrie's front door, masked, wearing a jacket, gloves, and pants, carrying a backpack, and, according to investigators, armed. The video was about 27 seconds long. In it, the masked figure approached the front door. He raised his gloved hand, and he covered the camera. A second clip, around 14 seconds, showed the same individual standing in front of the camera with what looked like a small flashlight held in his mouth. He bent down. He reached toward a flower bed near the porch. He picked up a piece of vegetation, what appeared to be a small plant or branch, and he held it up to the lens, attempting to obscure it. The FBI described the man as approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build, and noted he was carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack. They also said, in the description that accompanied the video, that the images came from the morning of her disappearance. Investigators released the video to the public for one reason. They wanted someone to recognize him. The gait, the shape of the shoulders, the way he moved, because that was the only way this masked figure was going to become a name. But within days, something even more unsettling came out of that footage. Sources familiar with the investigation told both ABC News and CNN that one of the images released by the FBI, the one in which the man appeared at the door without a backpack and without an obvious weapon, was not taken on the morning of February 1st at all. It was taken on a separate day, earlier, before the abduction. The Pima County Sheriff's Department disputed how that information was characterized, saying there were no timestamps on the released images, and that suggestions of separate dates were speculative. But the investigative theory was already public, and it was chilling. Because if the masked man had been at her door before the night she vanished, then what investigators were looking at was not a one-time intruder. They were looking at someone who had scouted the property, someone who had walked up to her front porch on at least one earlier occasion, someone who had seen the camera, studied it, learned the layout, and then come back. That is also why authorities made an unusual public request. They asked neighbors within a 2-mile radius of Nancy Guthrie's home to check their personal surveillance, their doorbell cameras, their backyard security systems, their dash cams, and their phone footage, going all the way back to the 1st of January, a full month before the abduction. A month of possible scouting. A month of someone, somewhere, perhaps walking past a window that recorded him, perhaps driving past a house that captured a license plate, perhaps standing at a gas pump where a credit card would later become a clue. Inside the house itself, investigators were doing the kind of work that does not photograph well, but matters more than anything else. They collected DNA. They collected hair samples. They removed a camera from the roof. They towed Nancy's car out of the garage to examine it for fingerprints and any other clues it might surrender. The blood on the porch came back as a match for Nancy. That was confirmed. That was the moment the family lost any remaining hope that this was a misunderstanding. But there was also DNA at the scene that did not belong to Nancy, and did not belong to anyone in her family. That DNA was sent off for testing. And here is where the case became technically complicated in a way that broke a lot of hearts. The first samples sent to a Florida laboratory either did not produce a hit in CODIS, the FBI's national database for offender DNA, or were what investigators described as mixed, meaning the sample contained material from more than one person, making it harder to isolate a single profile. Hair evidence was also collected, and was eventually sent on to the FBI's own laboratory for advanced analysis. Later, sources said a forensics laboratory in Northern California, the same laboratory connected to the Long Island serial killer case in which Rex Heuermann pleaded guilty to murdering 8 women, was now also reportedly assisting in the Guthrie case. 2 miles from Nancy's home, investigators recovered a pair of black gloves discarded along the side of a road. The gloves looked similar to the ones worn by the masked man in the doorbell footage. They were tested. The DNA on the gloves did not match Nancy. It did not produce a hit in CODIS. And eventually, that DNA was traced to a local restaurant worker who was determined to have no connection to the case at all. The gloves became a dead end. That is the rhythm of this investigation in those early weeks. A clue, a lead, a door that looked like it was opening, and then, again and again, the door closing, leaving everyone exactly where they had been the night before. But while the physical evidence was slow, methodical, and frustrating, something else was about to enter the story that nobody was prepared for, because the kidnappers, or the people claiming to be kidnappers, had decided to write letters, and they had decided to use Bitcoin. The first signal arrived 3 days after Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Multiple media outlets in Arizona and beyond began reporting that they had received what appeared to be ransom notes. The notes demanded payment in Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency that operates on a decentralized public ledger, free from banks, free from governments, but crucially, never quite as anonymous as people believe. Cold, the CBS affiliate, in Tucson, was one of the first stations to disclose receiving such a letter. KGUN, an ABC affiliate in the same market, was another. The celebrity news outlet TMZ also confirmed receiving correspondence. The senders demanded a sum that, at the time, was reported to be in the range of millions of dollars. According to one widely cited figure, the demand at one point reached $6 million. The first deadline, according to investigators, was a Thursday at 5 in the evening. The notes did not specify a time zone. When that deadline passed, a second deadline was issued, a Monday at 5 in the evening. That deadline also passed. No money was sent, or rather, no money the kidnappers had asked for, because something else was happening on the blockchain that day, and it would become one of the most discussed details of the entire case. The note had included a Bitcoin wallet address, long, complex, a string of letters and numbers, the kind that look meaningless to the untrained eye but are publicly viewable, traceable, and more importantly, watchable by anyone in the world with an internet connection. On the 10th of February, in the late afternoon, Arizona time, a small transaction landed in that wallet. Not millions, not thousands, approximately $152 worth of Bitcoin. The amount was reported by multiple outlets, including the news desk at KOMO, which laid out the timeline of the case. Authorities have not publicly confirmed who sent the $152 transaction. They have not publicly confirmed whether the transfer is meaningfully connected to the case at all. But blockchain forensics experts who watched it happen did have a theory. Bezalel Ethan Raviv, the founder and chief executive of the crypto security firm Lionsgate Network, told the program Katie Pavlich tonight that the transaction looked to him as if authorities were probing the wallet, sending a small amount, the way a careful hand might tap on a door, to see if the person on the other side responds. He also pointed out, to anyone listening, that providing a Bitcoin wallet address in a ransom case is a serious tactical error, because once that address is public, it becomes a beacon, and every dollar that flows through it leaves a permanent, traceable, immutable record on the blockchain. Now, here is what the public can verify. Bitcoin transactions are logged on a public ledger. Every transfer to and from any wallet is openly visible. Once a wallet is identified, blockchain analytics firms, working alongside law enforcement, can trace the flow of funds across thousands of subsequent transactions. They can map sending addresses. They can map receiving addresses. They can identify clusters of wallets that appear to be controlled by the same individual or group. And, crucially, the moment any of that money passes through a custodial cryptocurrency exchange, like Coinbase or Binance or Kraken, that exchange is bound by Know Your Customer regulations to have collected the identity of whoever owns the account on the other side. Full legal name, date of birth, home address, government identification. In other words, the moment the money tries to become real money, the money has to identify itself. That is the corner law enforcement was trying to push the kidnappers, or whoever they were, into. That is also the reason the $152 transaction was so closely watched, because every wallet that touches that wallet, even briefly, even casually, becomes part of the map. Every transfer becomes another step the trail can follow. And while the public never saw the inside of those investigative maps, you can be certain the FBI did. The next problem, however, was a problem nobody saw coming. Because for every real piece of correspondence the authorities were trying to authenticate, dozens of fake ones began flooding in. Strangers, opportunists, scammers, people who had never met Nancy Guthrie, people who had no information at all, people who simply wanted to take advantage of a famous family in pain. One of those strangers, according to the United States Department of Justice, was a 42-year-old man named Derek Colella of Hawthorne, California. On the 4th of February, 3 days after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, 2 members of her immediate family, her daughter Annie and her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni, received text messages. The messages, according to the grand jury indictment, asked, in the writer's own words, whether the family had received the Bitcoin, and noted that the sender was waiting on his end for the transaction. There was also a phone call, 9 seconds long, to one of the family members. The texts were sent through a voice-over Internet Protocol application, the kind of app that lets a user text and call from a number that looks anonymous on the surface. But anonymity online is rarely as solid as it looks. According to reporting from the Los Angeles Times and the indictment in the case, investigators linked the phone number to an email address, then linked the email address to a residence. By the 5th of February, the day after the messages were sent, Derek Colella was arrested. He was charged with transmitting a demand for ransom in interstate commerce, without disclosing his identity, while utilizing a telecommunications device with the intent to abuse, threaten, or harass a person. According to the indictment, Colella told investigators he had been following the case on television and had pulled the family's contact information from what he described as a cyber website. The Department of Justice was unsparing in its public response. The U.S. Attorney's Office made it clear that, in their words, grief profiteers would be held accountable. FBI Phoenix Special Agent in charge Heath Janke called him an imposter and warned others trying to do the same that they would be investigated and held responsible. Derek Colella was released pending pre-trial conditions. His trial was, as of the most recent reporting, set to begin on the 23rd of June, 2026, at the federal courthouse in Tucson. It is important to be precise here. Derek Colella has not been charged with abducting Nancy Guthrie. He has not been accused of involvement in her disappearance. He has been charged only with sending fake ransom communications after the fact. He is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But the existence of a man like Derek Colella tells you something about the world Nancy Guthrie's family was living in. Because every time the phone rang, every time an email pinged, every time a stranger reached out, the family had to brace themselves for the same impossible question. Is this real? Is this the call? Or is this another person trying to monetize my mother's life? That weight, that particular weight, is something investigators on this case have spoken about openly. Former FBI agents have called the original ransom letters a kind of negotiation in bad faith from the very start. One retired agent told the New York Post that one of the notes contained an unusual detail, the use of the term USD for dollars, which he said an American writer would be unlikely to use. That detail alone reshaped some of the early analysis. It hinted, faintly, at the possibility that the writer was not from the United States at all, or that the writer wanted investigators to think they were not. A second TMZ message, sent later, made an even more specific claim. It said the sender had seen Nancy alive in the Mexican state of Sonora. Sonora shares its northern border with Arizona. Tucson is roughly 70 miles north of that border. It is the same direction one of the persons of interest, briefly detained early in the case, had been driving when he was pulled over. Let us talk about that detention now, because it was one of the earliest moments in this investigation when it looked, even briefly, as if a name might enter the story. On the evening of the 10th of February, the same day the FBI released the doorbell footage, and the same day the $152 Bitcoin transaction landed, a man was detained for questioning during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona. Rio Rico sits roughly 60 miles south of Tucson, just north of the city of Nogales, which sits directly on the Mexican border. The man, who identified himself as Carlos, was held overnight and questioned for several hours. A search warrant was signed by a local judge in Santa Cruz County, and a property and vehicle associated with him were searched. Sources told ABC News he had been on the radar of the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department before that day, and that they had identified him through a series of electronic investigative tools, including cell phone usage information and traffic data. By the 11th of February, the search was concluded. Carlos was released without charges. He was placed under no further restrictions. Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly stated that the individual was determined not to be involved in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. That was the closest investigators have publicly come to a named suspect in this case. And as of the most recent reporting, no one else has been publicly identified. No suspect has been named, no motive has been confirmed, no arrest, beyond the unrelated case of Derek Colella, has been made in connection with the abduction itself. If you are watching this, and feeling the same heaviness that I am right now, take a breath. We are about to enter the second half of this story, the half where the family begins to speak publicly, where the investigators begin to expand their toolkit in ways that have rarely been seen, and where the search itself becomes one of the most watched manhunts in the country. Before we go there, I want to ask you one more thing. If you have been watching this whole way through, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. So please, take 1 second to subscribe to True Crime Investigator Alex if you have not already. We do these deep, evidence-first breakdowns because cases like Nancy Guthrie's deserve more than a headline, and her family deserves a public that does not look away. The bell, the like, the share, they sound small. They are not. They are the algorithm's invitation card, and we want this case in front of as many human eyes as possible. Now, back to the story, to the people inside it. On the day the family gathered together for the first time on camera, it had been less than a week since Nancy was last seen alive. Her 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron, recorded a video message together. They asked the alleged kidnapper, whoever they were, to make contact. They asked for proof that their mother was still alive. The video was raw. There was no anchor desk. There was no script. There were 3 siblings, sitting close together, asking the impossible question every family in this position has ever asked. Is she still alive? Days later, as the deadlines passed, Nancy Guthrie's son, Cameron, posted a public message on social media, opening another channel for any communication from the alleged captor. None came back. Or rather, none came back that the FBI publicly confirmed. There was no proof of life, no video, no audio, no photograph, no phrase that only a daughter would recognize, just silence. Savannah Guthrie, who had built her career as one of the most steady, composed faces in American morning television, briefly stepped away from her duties at NBC. She paused her coverage assignments, including her involvement in the 2026 Winter Olympics, and traveled to Arizona to be near the search. Producers at NBC, according to public reporting, implemented quiet but precise procedures around her on-air time. If a major break came in the case during the broadcast, Savannah would be sequestered, given the news privately, while another anchor handled the moment on screen. The decision was not symbolic, it was protective, because there are some kinds of news no one should learn while a camera is pointed at their face. In late February, the family announced they were offering a $1 million reward for any information that led to the recovery of Nancy. That was on top of an earlier reward, $50,000 from the FBI, later doubled to $100,000, for information leading to her location, or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. On the 6th of April, more than 2 months after her mother disappeared, Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show. She greeted viewers as if she had simply been on a long and difficult trip. In her words, that morning, it was good to be home. She did not break down. She did not retreat. She delivered the news the way she had every weekday morning for years. But everyone who watched her knew what was missing from her voice, even when her voice did not waver. And in a later interview with her former co-host Hoda Kotb, she finally said out loud what had been written across her family's silence the entire time. She told Hoda that it was too much to bear, the thought that she had brought this to her mother's bedside, that it was, somehow, because of her. She apologized to her mother, on television, the way a daughter apologizes to a parent who is no longer in the room. And then she said something even harder, that her family could not be at peace without answers, that, honestly, they did not know anything. While the family was carrying that public weight, the investigators in the field were quietly expanding the search in ways that border on science fiction. One of the most striking decisions came when the Pima County Sheriff's Department began deploying what is technically called a signal sniffer. A signal sniffer is a piece of equipment, in some configurations small enough to be mounted on a helicopter, in others handheld, that scans for radio frequency emissions. Pacemakers, in modern medicine, do not just sit in your chest in silence. They communicate. They send out periodic, very short-range, encrypted radio signals to home base stations and paired phones, allowing doctors to monitor cardiac events in near real time. Investigators, working in coordination with the manufacturer of Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker, began sweeping low-altitude flights over the area of investigation, listening for the distinct signature of her device. Morgan Wright, the chief executive and founder of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, told Cold that the pacemaker was, in his words, the most unbiased witness they had. It could not lie. It could not be coerced. It could not change its story. It would simply emit, as long as it had power, a small electronic whisper that said, "Here I am." The technology has limits. A pacemaker cannot transmit a GPS coordinate. It cannot pin a location to a map. It can only confirm proximity to a receiver. But, in an investigation where every other thread had run dry, the idea of a small mechanical heart, beating somewhere out there, broadcasting its own existence into the desert, became one of the most quietly hopeful images of the entire case. While the helicopters flew, while the laboratories tested, while the canvases repeated themselves block by block, the broader investigation kept widening. Officials briefed United States Border Patrol agents along the United States and Mexico border. They briefed Mexican law enforcement authorities. The doorbell footage of the masked man was distributed on both sides of that border, in case someone, somewhere, had seen that gait, that build, that face, that backpack. Tucson sits roughly 70 miles from the Mexican border. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie did not have to drive far to leave the country. The investigation also pulled in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, United States Customs and Border Protection, and search and rescue teams. Volunteers, including, at one point, the United Cajun Navy, a civilian disaster response group, offered their services. The Pima County Sheriff's Department increased patrols in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood, in part to manage the growing number of vloggers and amateur journalists who began traveling to the area to film outside Nancy's home and Annie's home. So intense was that informal traffic that the Sheriff's Department had to publicly ask members of the public to stop calling 911 and the non-emergency line to share their personal opinions about the case. And around all of it, on social media, the case began to take on a life of its own. Strangers thousands of miles away built timelines. Volunteer researchers, some of them experienced in genealogy, others new to true crime entirely, began swapping tips at all hours of the night, the kind of community some outlets eventually called mom detectives, sleep-deprived, deeply committed, and emotionally invested in a case that was not theirs. That is the social context in which the $152 transaction took on so much meaning, because in a case starved for new information, that single payment was the rare, public, observable, dateable moment when something tangible happened. It was the kind of detail you could photograph. The kind of detail you could time stamp. The kind of detail that gave watchers, both professional and amateur, something to anchor their theories to. To experts, that small transaction was almost certainly an investigative probe. The kind of careful tap on the digital door that blockchain forensics analysts use to test whether a wallet is being monitored. To outsiders, it became a symbol. The smallness of the amount, the precision of the timing, the silence that followed, all of it gave the impression that something quiet was being said in the language of money, between people who did not want to speak in plain English. That is the danger and the gift of public investigations. In an information vacuum, a single $152 transaction can become a kind of myth, and myths in turn generate noise. Some of that noise is useful, some of it is damaging. In one viral moment, a rumor spread that another person of interest had been detained in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Sheriff Chris Nanos, asked directly by a reporter from Fox News if there had been a new detention, gave a one-word answer: nope. The rumor died, but it had lived long enough to gather tens of thousands of views. Throughout it all, certain truths held steady, no matter how loud the speculation became. The Guthrie family, every sibling, every spouse, every adult child, was publicly cleared as suspects in Nancy's disappearance. Sheriff Nanos said, plainly on the record, that the family had been cooperative and gracious, and that they were victims in this case. Tommaso Zioni, the son-in-law who had driven Nancy home that final night, had been the last known person to see her. He was treated, as he should have been, as a witness, not as a target. Investigators interviewed him. They moved on. The same was true of the Uber driver, who had earlier transported Nancy to Annie's home for that final dinner. He was identified, interviewed, and excluded. That kind of clarity is not always the case in high-profile disappearances. Often, suspicion drifts toward the people closest to the victim simply because they are the only people the public can name. In Nancy Guthrie's case, investigators worked hard to publicly close that door. The people who loved her are not the people who took her, which leaves us, at the time of this recording, exactly where the investigators are, standing at the edge of a very deep, very dark question. Who took Nancy Guthrie, and why? There are theories. None of them have been confirmed. Authorities have said, more than once, that they believe Nancy was specifically targeted before being taken from her residence. They have not publicly explained why. A retired FBI agent floated, in an interview, the theory that the abduction may have stemmed from a personal grievance, not a random crime. Another retired detective, Bob Gilliam, suggested during a panel that more than one person was involved. His analysis focused on a small detail in the doorbell footage, what he believed to be the outline of a radio with a visible antenna in the suspect's pocket. As he put it, you do not bring a radio to a crime scene if you are working alone. Former Police Sergeant John Lamb agreed with that read, suggesting at least 2 abductors and possibly a transport lookout. None of those theories have been officially endorsed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI. What the investigators have publicly stated is what they have evidence for. A masked man at the door, possibly on more than one date. Drops of blood on the porch, confirmed as Nancy's. A doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. A second camera, registering a person, with no recorded video, at 2:12. A pacemaker app, losing its connection at 2:28. A house with all of her belongings inside it. A driveway with a trail leading to a place no one has yet found. And then, the long, slow daylight after that night. Days turning into weeks, weeks turning into months. A trial date set, for a man who is accused of imitating a kidnapper. A wallet on a public blockchain, holding $152, sitting where it has sat for weeks, waiting. A pacemaker, somewhere, possibly still emitting a small encrypted signal. A signal sniffer, sweeping the desert. A laboratory in California, working slowly through hair and DNA. A family that has begged, on national television, for proof of life, and gotten none. As of the most recent public reporting, nearly 3 months after Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home, her condition and her whereabouts remain unknown. Law enforcement has stated that the search remains active. Now we get to the part of this story that always makes me pause. The part where the cinematic narration ends and the truth of what we are dealing with begins. Nancy Guthrie is not a character in a thriller. She is an 84-year-old woman with 3 children, multiple grandchildren, and a daily schedule that revolved around her church, her family, and her quiet life in a quiet neighborhood. She did not ask to be at the center of a national news cycle. She did not ask for cameras outside her front door. She did not ask for her face to be printed on missing persons posters from Tucson to New York City. She just went out for dinner with her daughter on a Saturday night, and was driven home, and walked through her own front door, and never came back out of it. What we know is that she was targeted. What we know is that someone planned this, someone watched her home, possibly walked up to that front door more than once, made decisions about which camera to disable first, and chose a timetable between roughly 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning to take her. Someone left blood on her porch. Someone walked her into the dark. And someone, whether the same person or a different person entirely, then attempted to extract money from her grieving family by writing letters, sending texts, and naming Bitcoin wallets. What we do not know is everything that matters most. We do not know if she is alive. The family says they believe she is. The FBI has not contradicted that. But there has been no proof of life, despite weeks of public pleading. We do not know who was inside that mask. We do not know whether there were 1, 2, or more people involved. We do not know whether the masked man was the same individual on both visits to the house. We do not know whether the original ransom letters came from the people who took her, from someone with knowledge of the crime, or from a third party. We do not know whether the $152 transaction was a probe, a signal, a test, or an unrelated piece of digital noise. We do not know what direction her abductor drove, although the proximity to Mexico has been a serious investigative consideration from day one. We do not know whether her pacemaker is still transmitting. We do not know what is on the next deleted page of this case. In short, we know exactly enough to feel the weight of what we do not know. That is the cruelty of certain investigations. They do not end. They simply continue, in slow motion, while the rest of the world moves on. New cases hit the headlines, new tragedies fill the airtime. The cameras eventually leave, but the family stays. They wake up every morning. They pour their coffee. They look at the empty chair where their mother used to sit. And they continue. In Nancy Guthrie's case, what makes it harder to look away is precisely the thing that put her in the headlines in the first place. Her daughter is on television. Every morning, on a national broadcast, Savannah Guthrie sits behind a desk and reports on the world, while the world quietly knows what is missing from her life. Her composure on screen is, in a sense, its own quiet protest. A daughter refusing to let her family disappear without a fight. A daughter who, in her own interview, said the words that any of us would say in her place. "I am so sorry, Mommy." Now, before we close this out, let me leave you with the practical things. The reasons we do not just tell stories on this channel. We try to give you the tools to be useful, even from your couch. If you live anywhere within driving distance of Tucson, if you live anywhere along the corridor between Tucson and Nogales, if you live anywhere in southern Arizona or northern Sonora, Mexico, if you have a vehicle dashcam you have not reviewed since January, if you have a doorbell camera that holds more than 30 days of footage, if you have ever passed by Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood in the Catalina Foothills, even briefly, and you have video, photographs, or memory of an unfamiliar vehicle, an unfamiliar person, a man, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build, possibly carrying a green Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, please do not assume someone else has already submitted that information. You can call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can submit a tip at the FBI's online tip portal. You can call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The family is offering $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The FBI's reward, doubled in February, stands at $100,000 for information leading to her location or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved. That is not just cash. That is, in some sense, the entire point of public information about a case like this. The reward exists because the people closest to her have spent every dollar of their hope and every hour of their day trying to bring her home. The least the rest of us can do is keep our eyes open. If you have been with us for the entire video, thank you. Genuinely, this is the kind of story that takes time to tell, and the kind of audience this channel was built for. Before you click away, do me one final favor. Like the video, subscribe to True Crime Investigator, Alex, and drop a single sentence in the comments, in your own words, telling us what part of Nancy Guthrie's story stayed with you the longest, because comments push this video into more feeds. More feeds means more eyes, and more eyes means a higher chance that someone, somewhere, finally sees the face behind that mask, recognizes the voice on a phone call, identifies the figure on a porch, or speaks up about something they remember from the night of January 31st. The case is not closed. The trial of Derek Colella, the alleged imposter, is currently set to begin on the 2003rd of June, 2026, at the federal courthouse in Tucson. The investigators are still working. The family is still waiting. The pacemaker, if it is still powered, is still emitting its quiet, indifferent signal, somewhere in the Sonoran landscape. And the $152 transaction is still sitting on the public Bitcoin blockchain, exactly where it was placed, like a single stone dropped in a long river, marking the moment the world decided to start paying attention. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie was born on the 27th of January, 1942. She is 84 years old. She has lived in Tucson for more than 50 years. She has 3 children, several grandchildren, a faith community that prays for her every week, and a country full of strangers who have learned her name without ever meeting her. And somewhere, tonight, in a place we have not yet found, she is either still alive, waiting, or she is the answer to a question her family has been asking for nearly 3 months. Either way, she deserves more than what she has been given. She deserves the truth. And the truth, in a case like this, is never delivered by a single person. It is delivered by a million small decisions: to pay attention, to remember, to submit the tip, to check the footage, to make the call. I am asking you to make one of those decisions tonight. Subscribe to True Crime Investigator. Alex, stay with this case. And if anything we have walked through tonight rang a bell in your memory, even faintly, even unsurely, pick up the phone and tell someone. The smallest signal is sometimes the one that breaks the silence wide open. Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep your mind sharp, and keep watching. Because every story worth telling on this channel is, in the end, a story about the people who refuse to let it be forgotten.